All right, we talked about in the last video that a system is comprised of inputs, outputs, and processing. But what happens when those outputs are fed back into the system and reprocessed? We get what is called feedback. Now we're going to look at two types of feedback, positive and negative. Positive feedback is when the feedback into the system causes it to continue to change in the same direction. So I'll show you an example of positive feedback. You've probably heard of feedback with a microphone. So let's say I'm speaking into a microphone. My microphone is hooked up to an amplifier. And the amplifier is hooked to a speaker. Well, the sound comes out of the speaker and goes back into the microphone. So what that does is increases the volume or increases the sound into the amplifier, which increases the sound into the speaker. Now you've probably heard what happens if your speaker is too close to the microphone and the sound enters, then you get that high-pitched squeal. So that is positive feedback because your output, or the sound, is fed back into the system, causing it to increase. Now, one of the things that is difficult to understand with positive and negative feedback, don't think of positive as a good thing and negative as a bad thing. Positive just means it continues to change in the same direction. If we were to plot this on a graph, and we looked at what happens to the volume over time, we would see exponential growth. So positive feedback is usually associated with exponential growth. Human population is another example of positive feedback. All right, so let's look at negative feedback. Thermostat is a great example. All right, so let's say that the room temperature starts to increase. When the room temperature increases, that triggers the thermostat, and the thermostat causes the heater to turn off. So the thermostat senses the change and turns off the heater. Well, when the heater turns off, the room temperature is going to start to decrease. When the room temperature reaches a certain point, the thermostat senses the change and turns on the heater. And when we turn on the heater, that causes the room temperature to increase. So here we have an increase in temperature. Here we have a decrease in temperature. So we're not changing in the same direction. This is called negative feedback. So if we look at what that would look like on a graph, okay, now I'm going to look at how the temperature changes over time. So we started with the room temperature increase. Thermostat comes on, turns off the heater, and we see a decrease, then we see an increase, and we see a decrease, and we see an increase. So what that establishes is an equilibrium. So negative feedback is generally ideal because ecosystems want to be stable. We want ecosystems to reach an equilibrium. So this is what we want to see. We want to see that changing in opposite directions as opposed to positive feedback, which changes in the same direction.